So today we are going to talk about soil properties. Have you ever noticed it rains the same everywhere, but in some places the water just vanishes and in others it forms big muddy puddles? Why does water vanish in one place and pool in another? Is ground playing some kind of trick? Let's find out. The answer lies in something called percolation. When rainwater hits the soil, it doesn't just sit there. It moves down through the tiny gaps between the soil particles. This movement is called percolation. Water moving through the soil in those tiny spaces. And since this is a movement, it has particular speed. This speed at which the water flows through the soil is called the percolation rate. Now, some soils let water flow quickly, like sandy soil, because as we have studied in the previous part, sandy soil contains a lot of spaces between their particles. And some soil, like clay, they hold water longer. So, it becomes a little longer for the water to pass through the clay soil. And loamy soil, as they have medium space between them compared to the previous two, they allow the medium rate of percolation. But here is something students confuse often. They often see percolation as how much water the soil can absorb. That's completely false. Percolation is actually how fast the water moves through. How much water the soil holds is something that we call absorption. You got to understand the difference between percolation and absorption, and I hope this clears it up. Percolation means how fast water moves through the soil, and absorption means how much water soil holds. Big difference, right? Now, if you want to observe this phenomenon, you can do a little experiment by yourself using the house equipments, to how to measure the percolation rate of a soil. What you got to do is you have to take a jar and add a soil sample from around you. Now, you have to pour the fixed amount of water into the jar. Next, you have to use a timer to see how long the water takes to pass through the soil sample. Now, one small mistake that I did in this diagram was to keep a hole here. So, I'll just request you assume a little hole here from which your water will be dripping out. And you have to measure the fixed amount of water, how much time it takes to get through this much amount of soil. Now, to measure the percolation rate, all you got to do is you have to take the amount of water, which is why I asked you to take a fixed amount of water in ml, and you have to divide it by the time taken for all the water to come out, and you will count that in seconds. So what you will get is percolation rate in milliliters per second. You can conduct this for n number of soil samples. You can try it with different types of soils. Now, as we are conducting a little science experiment, I would like to give you some tips for it. First is, whatever you do, you have to keep the same setup and equal water for each sample. In this way, we can normalize our experiment for every setup, where we are saying ki, okay, the fixed amount of water, when we passed it through different soil samples, it got us these different percolation rate, and thus we can figure out our scientific information out of it. Second is to do this in a tray or outdoor area. And don't forget to clean up when you're done. Science can get messy, but we can always clean it like pros. Now, we always prefer speed, and we would naturally assume that faster percolation would mean better soil. But that's not the case for soils here. For soil, what really matters is balance. So, when we talk about sandy soil, when we think about this experiment in sandy soil, you can imagine that water drains too fast. Why? Because sandy soil have a lot of space between them through which the water would pass easily. What would this have an impact on the plants? The roots of the plants would stay dry because the water is percolating away. What about clay soil? If you think about clayey soil, the water drains too slow because they have lesser space between their soil particles, which is why the water would really keep locked in that area. And too much water logging in that area can cause roots to drown, which is exactly why loamy soil is considered balanced one for most of the plants. Why? Because it provides balanced drainage of water compared to other two types of soils, which promotes the healthy growth of the plants. That is exactly why loamy soil with its medium percolation rate is usually the best. Not too fast, not too slow, just the right one. As you can see in this little diagram that I have tried to generate, sandy soil, you can consider it too dry for the plants. Clay soil, you can consider it too wet for the plants. And when it gets too wet, it cannot provide the oxygen in the air that is usually present in the spaces. And loamy soil would be the ideal balanced one for it. But wait a minute. Why does this matter? Why are we only talking about the percolation when we are really discussing about soil properties? Well, why percolation matters? The answer to that is simply due to the fact that percolation rate tells us a lot about the behavior of the soil, how soil would behave with other plants, other species. Firstly, it tells farmers to choose the right soil or the right crops for the given soil. Depending on what type of soil is, it will have different percolation rates. It will hold water differently. This would help farmers choose the right soil or the right crops. It also helps builders to know if water will drain quickly from the land, how much water is drained from the particular soil, or how much water is contained in that particular soil. Gives us the idea how safe it is to build the bigger buildings in the given land. It even helps us explain how groundwater forms, and this overall helps us understand how the different organisms would interact in that area, how they would live in the area, what would be their ideal characteristic depending on what type of soil it is. In other words, understanding percolation of that particular soil is like understanding the secret life of the soil. So just to quickly summarize this, water moving through the soil is what we call percolation, and the speed of this flow is what we call percolation rate. Different soils can have different percolation speeds. Percolation is not equal to absorption. Those two are completely different terms. Faster percolation doesn't always mean better for plant growth and soil fertility. Loamy soil is ideal for most of the plants since it provides the balanced drainage. And we also saw how percolation helps us understand the life of soil and how it would interact and engage with other life, whether it would help them grow, and if yes, then how. Thank you so much.